Picture this. It is 6:30 in the morning in Tagaytay, and I am sitting outside a little coffee shop just off Aguinaldo Highway with a paper cup warming both hands. The air is cool enough that I can see steam drifting off the coffee. A jeepney rattles past. Somewhere behind me, somebody is sweeping a concrete floor with one of those stiff little brooms that makes a scratching sound you notice only when the rest of the morning is quiet. I have 680 pesos in my wallet, a cheap phone on the table, and exactly one person left in the Philippines who I am still willing to trust. 3 months earlier, I had $31,000. $31,000. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like I did something reckless. It sounds like I met somebody on the internet, ignored every warning sign, wired away my life savings, and then acted surprised when the money disappeared. I wish the story were that simple, because if it were, I could just call myself an idiot and be done with it. My name is Robert Hale. I'm 72 years old. I grew up outside Toledo, Ohio, and I spent 38 years working in commercial refrigeration. Grocery stores, restaurants, school kitchens, anything that had to stay cold, I was the guy they called when it stopped. I was never wealthy. I was dependable. There is a difference, and most of my adult life I was proud of that difference. When I retired, I had Social Security, a small pension, and some savings. Enough to live, but not enough to live without thinking about every bill. My wife, Carol, had died 4 years earlier from ovarian cancer. After she was gone, the house felt too large and too quiet. My daughter wanted me closer to her in Indiana, but she had a husband, 2 teenagers, and a life that was already crowded. She never said I was a burden. She did not have to. I could feel myself arranging my days around not needing anything from anybody. I tried staying busy. I volunteered at a food pantry. I joined a bowling league. I bought a used fishing boat that I barely used because every time I took it out, I thought about how Carol used to complain that I packed too many sandwiches. I even looked at one of those senior communities with a nice lobby, a little gym, organized card nights, and rent that made my chest tighten. That was when I started watching videos about retiring overseas. The Philippines kept coming back because of the English, the cost of living, and because the men in those videos did not all look like millionaires pretending to be adventurous. A lot of them looked like me, gray hair, reading glasses, cheap polo shirts, men who had worked ordinary jobs and were trying to make the numbers add up without spending the last 20 years of their lives scared of the mailbox. I spent almost a year researching before I booked a flight. I read expat forums until 2 in the morning. I joined Facebook groups. I made spreadsheets. I watched apartment tours and grocery videos. I compared health insurance, visa rules, bank fees, exchange rates, neighborhoods, hospitals, transportation, and even how much a decent cup of coffee cost. I picked Tagaytay because it felt manageable. Cooler weather, enough restaurants and shops that I would not feel cut off, but not the noise and crush of Manila every time I stepped outside. I rented a furnished one-bedroom apartment for 24,000 pesos a month, which was about $420 at the time. Nothing fancy. White tile floors, a little balcony, a shower heater that had 2 settings, lukewarm and angry, and a view that gave me a sliver of Tal Lake if the morning was clear. The first 6 months were better than I expected. That is the part people never believe once they hear what happened later. I was not lonely in the same way anymore. There were always people around. The woman downstairs sold rice meals in plastic containers and started saving chicken adobo for me because she knew I liked it less sweet. The security guard, Nestor, practiced his English on me even though his English was already better than mine some mornings. I found a barber who charged me less than I was used to paying for a hamburger back home. I learned where to buy fruit, which ATM did not eat my card, and which coffee shop would let me sit for 2 hours without acting like I was taking up valuable real estate. Then I met Daniel. That is not his real name. I am not interested in turning this into a hunt for one person. What matters is what I believed about him. He was a Filipino man in his mid-40s who had spent several years working in Dubai. His English was excellent. He knew how to talk to foreigners without making you feel like a walking wallet. I met him through another expat at a small restaurant near Olivares Plaza. He helped the owner with deliveries, paperwork, and suppliers. He seemed to know everybody. The first thing he ever did for me was refuse money. I'd been trying to get a piece of furniture delivered, and there was confusion about the address. Daniel made 2 phone calls, spoke to the driver, and sorted it out in 10 minutes. I offered him 500 pesos for his trouble. He laughed and pushed my hand away. Buy me coffee sometime. That was it. I remember that because later I replayed every early interaction, looking for the hook. I wanted to find the moment when I should have known. But trust does not always begin with a dramatic lie. Sometimes it begins with somebody being useful, calm, and generous when they do not have to be. Over the next year, Daniel became the person I called when I was confused about something. He explained how local leases worked. He told me which repair quotes were too high. He translated a conversation with a mechanic after I bought a used scooter. When I got food poisoning, he brought electrolyte drinks and bananas to my apartment and refused to come inside because he said I needed sleep. He met my daughter on a video call. My daughter had been suspicious of everybody I met here, and I do not blame her. Daniel joked with her for 15 minutes. He told her I was stubborn about wearing sunscreen. She laughed. I laughed. By the end of that call, she said, "At least somebody is keeping an eye on you." I believed that too. The money started with a business idea. There was a small apartment building outside Tagaytay that Daniel said belonged to a relative who needed capital to renovate 4 units. The plan sounded simple. I would put in money for repairs. The units would be rented long term. I would receive a fixed return from the rental income until my principal was repaid, plus a share after that. I did not hand over $31,000 in one shot. I want to be clear about that. The first amount was $4,500. I asked questions. I saw the building. I met people who said they were relatives. I saw workers there, cement bags, tile, paint, new doors stacked in one room. Daniel showed me a folder of documents. I even had another foreigner I knew look at the arrangement, and he said it looked better than half the things people got involved with over here. The first 2 payments came exactly when promised. That was the genius of it. I put in more. Then there was a delay because of permits. Then another amount was needed because material costs had risen. Then 1 unit had a plumbing problem. Every new request came with photographs, receipts, names, explanations. By that point, I was not evaluating a stranger. I was listening to a friend who had helped me for over a year. The total reached $31,000, and then Daniel disappeared. Not vanished off the face of the earth. That would have almost been easier. His phone still rang. His messages still showed delivered. A cousin told me he had gone to Manila for a family emergency. Another person said he was in Batangas. Somebody else said he was sick. Then the stories stopped matching. I drove to the apartment building. There were tenants in 2 units. They had no idea who I was. The building did not belong to Daniel's relative. The renovation had been real, but the owner told me Daniel had only helped coordinate some work months earlier. The documents I had seen were copies arranged to look like something they were not. The receipts were real receipts, but not all for that property. The payments I received had not come from rental income. They had come from my own money. I sat in my scooter helmet on the concrete steps outside that building for maybe 20 minutes without moving. There is a kind of humiliation that feels physical. My face was hot. My stomach felt hollow. I kept hearing my daughter's voice from that video call. At least somebody is keeping an eye on you. I had spent my whole life being the careful one. I was the guy who checked the breaker twice before opening a refrigeration panel. I was the guy who kept receipts in envelopes by month. I was the guy who told younger technicians not to assume anything just because somebody sounded confident. And I had lost $31,000. 31,000. It was not every dollar I had, but it was enough to change the rest of my life. For the next 2 weeks, I barely left my apartment except to buy food. I stopped going to the coffee shop. I stopped answering messages from people I knew. Every friendly face suddenly looked like a question. What do you want from me? That thought gets ugly fast. A waiter smiles and you wonder why. A neighbor asks if you need anything and you wonder what it will cost later. A stranger starts a conversation and you are already looking for the angle. The worst part was not losing trust in Daniel. The worst part was feeling myself lose trust in everybody else. My daughter wanted me to come home. She did not say, "I told you so." I almost wish she had. Anger would have been easier to handle than concern. She said, "Dad, you don't have to prove anything. Just come back." I looked at flights that night. I opened the airline website. I picked a date. I even started adding a checked bag. Then I stopped because something hit me that I could not ignore. If I left right then, I would not just be leaving the Philippines. I would be handing Daniel everything: the money, the friendship, the place I had built a life, the routines I loved, the people who had never done a thing to me. He would have taken all of it and packed it into one lesson. You were stupid to trust anyone here. I could not accept it. So the next morning I went back to the coffee shop, 6:30. Cool air, paper cup. Nestor had just finished his night shift and saw me from across the road. He walked over and sat down without asking. He knew something had happened because I had been disappearing. I told him the whole story, not the cleaned up version, the embarrassing version. I told him how much I had given Daniel. I told him I had ignored little doubts because I did not want to insult a friend. I told him I was thinking about going back to Ohio. Nestor listened for a long time. And then he said, "Sir Robert, one bad man is very expensive. Do not make him more expensive." That sentence stayed with me. One bad man is very expensive. Do not make him more expensive. I started dealing with the mess instead of hiding from it. I gathered every message, receipt, bank record, photo, and document I had. I spoke with a local attorney. I reported what had happened. I contacted the people connected to the property. I stopped telling myself that being embarrassed was a reason to be passive. I did not recover the full amount. I recovered a little over $8,000 through a combination of returned funds and a settlement tied to money that could still be traced. The rest was gone, at least as far as I was ever able to get it back. So, yes, I lost money, a lot of money. But I also changed the way I lived. I stopped making private financial arrangements with friends. If money is involved now, friendship steps out of the room. Everything is written. Everything gets reviewed independently. I do not care if somebody feels offended. A good person will survive a contract. I also separated my finances in a way I should have done from the beginning. One account for monthly living, one emergency reserve I do not touch, one account for anything discretionary. I lowered the amount of money I keep accessible from the Philippines and set up alerts on transfers. I became more cautious. But I made a decision not to become cold. That was harder. There was a woman named Liza who ran a small laundry shop I used. After everything happened, I started counting every piece of clothing before I dropped it off. Shirts, socks, towels, all of it. One afternoon she looked at me and said, "Robert, you think I steal your socks now?" I started laughing. I had not laughed in weeks. She laughed too. Then she got serious and said, "Be careful. Yes, but don't be afraid every day." That was the second sentence I needed. Be careful, yes, but don't be afraid every day. There is a difference between wisdom and fear, and after what happened, I had mixed them together. Wisdom says verify. Fear says isolate. Wisdom says do not hand somebody $31,000 because you like him. Fear says nobody who is kind to you can possibly mean it. Wisdom protects your life. Fear shrinks it. I had already lost money. I did not want to lose the country too. So I stayed. I moved to a slightly smaller apartment when my lease ended. My rent dropped to 19,500 pesos a month. I sold the scooter because I never really liked driving it in traffic anyway. I started cooking breakfast at home. I learned how little I actually needed to feel comfortable. and something strange happened. My life got better, not because the scam was good for me. I hate that kind of thinking. Some things are just bad. Being betrayed by somebody you trust is bad. Losing money you worked decades to save is bad. But after it happened, I stopped pretending that money was the only thing holding my retirement together. I had friends, real ones. Nestor checked on me for weeks and never asked for anything. Liza sent her teenage son over to help when my internet router died. The woman downstairs still saved chicken adobo for me. An Australian fellow I knew from coffee brought me a folder of contacts for lawyers and accountants and said, "Use mine before you trust the next bloke with a printer." Even my daughter changed her mind about me staying. A few months after the worst of it, she came to visit. That was the first time she had seen my life here in person. I took her to People's Park in the sky. We ate bulalo on a rainy afternoon. We stood near the ridge while clouds moved so low it felt like you could reach out and touch them. She met Nestor. She met Liza. She saw the apartment. She saw the market where I bought fruit. On her last night, we sat on my balcony with 2 bottles of San Miguel. She said, "I thought you were staying because you were too embarrassed to come home." I told her I'd been embarrassed. Then she asked, "So why are you really staying?" I looked over the railing at the lights down the road. I said, "Because this is home now." That surprised me when I said it, but it was true. I had spent most of my life believing home was the place where nothing could surprise you. The same roads, the same grocery store, the same weather complaints, the same people you had known for 30 years. Now I think home is where your life has weight, where people notice when you disappear for 2 weeks, where somebody knows how you take your coffee, where the lady downstairs knows you do not like the adobo too sweet, where a security guard crosses the road after a night shift because he can see something is wrong with you. That does not mean I became naive again. I will never be that man again. If somebody brings me an investment opportunity now, I smile and say no before they finish the sentence. If they tell me it is guaranteed, I say no faster. If they tell me I have to decide today, I am already walking away. I am 72. I do not need to turn my retirement into a business seminar. I need enough money for rent, enough for medical care, enough for food, enough for a flight home if I ever need one, enough left over for coffee in the morning and maybe a decent dinner on Friday. That is a very different definition of wealth than I had 10 years ago. Sometimes people hear my story and ask the same question. How could you stay after that? They mean the Philippines. But I think they are asking the wrong question. I did not lose $31,000 to the Philippines. I lost it to one person. If a man cheats you in Ohio, you do not blame Ohio. If a contractor lies to you in Florida, you do not swear off the United States. But when you are a foreigner, it is easy to turn one betrayal into a story about an entire country, especially when you are hurt and ashamed and looking for a clean explanation. I nearly did that. I'm glad I did not. These days, I still go to that same coffee shop some mornings. Not every morning. Coffee out adds up. But when the air is cool and the fog is sitting low over Tagaytay, I walk over around 6:30. I sit outside. I hold the cup in both hands. A jeepney rattles past. Somebody is always sweeping something. And every now and then I think about that morning when I had 680 pesos in my wallet and believed my life here might be over. I remember how small the table looked. I remember how stupid I felt. I remember Nestor sitting down across from me and saying one bad man was already expensive enough. He was right. Daniel took $31,000 from me. I was not going to let him take the Philippines too.